Have you ever said yes when every part of you wanted to say no? Have you ever set a boundary only to feel guilty the moment you did? Like you were being selfish, cold, or difficult for simply protecting your peace? If that sounds familiar, there is a reason, and it is not because you are weak or inconsiderate. Women are often taught that being kind means being available, that being loving means overgiving, that setting boundaries makes you difficult, ungrateful, or unlovable. Over time, this conditioning creates a quiet conflict inside you. You know what you need, but you are afraid of the emotional cost of asking for it. In this video, we are going to talk about the psychology behind guilt, why women feel it so deeply when they set boundaries, and how to protect your time, energy, and emotional well-being without feeling like you are hurting others in the process. This is not about becoming cold or distant. It is about becoming clear, grounded, and self-respecting. If you have ever felt exhausted from always being the one who understands, compromises, and gives, stay with me until the end, because once you learn how to set boundaries without guilt, everything about your relationships begins to change. Chapter 1. Why Guilt Shows Up When You Say No. Guilt is often the first emotion that appears when a woman sets a boundary. It arrives quietly, sometimes instantly, sometimes hours later, but it is almost always there. You say no to a request, you choose yourself, you protect your time or energy, and instead of relief, your chest tightens. A voice inside asks if you were too harsh, too selfish, too difficult. This reaction feels personal, as if something is wrong with you, but the truth is much deeper. Guilt is not a flaw in your character, it is a signal shaped by years of conditioning. From a young age, many women learn that love is earned through accommodation. Being good means being agreeable. Being kind means being available. Being valued means being easy to be around. Over time, this message becomes internalized. Your nervous system begins to associate harmony with safety and disapproval with danger. So when you set a boundary, even a healthy one, your body reacts as if you have broken an unspoken rule. Guilt is the emotional alarm that goes off when you step outside the role you were trained to play. This is why guilt feels physical. It is not just a thought, it is a sensation, a tightening in the stomach, a heaviness in the chest, a restless urge to fix, explain, or take the boundary back. Your body is responding to perceived risk, not moral failure. It is responding to the fear of losing connection, approval, or belonging. Guilt thrives in people who care deeply. It often shows up strongest in women who are empathetic, responsible, and emotionally aware. You notice other people's needs quickly. You sense disappointment easily. You feel responsible for how others feel. These qualities are not weaknesses, they are strengths. But without boundaries, they become tools you use against yourself. When you say yes while wanting to say no, guilt stays quiet. When you finally say no, guilt speaks up. Not because you did something wrong, but because you did something unfamiliar. Your mind is stepping into new territory, and uncertainty always triggers emotional resistance. Another reason guilt appears is because boundaries challenge old identity patterns. If you have seen yourself as the helper, the peacemaker, the reliable one, setting a boundary can feel like a betrayal of who you are. You are not just saying no to a request, you are saying no to a version of yourself that has been rewarded for overgiving. Guilt arises when identity shifts faster than emotional processing. It is important to understand that guilt does not mean the boundary was incorrect. In fact, guilt often appears when the boundary is necessary. If you were truly doing something harmful or unethical, you would feel remorse. Remorse focuses on repairing harm. Guilt around boundaries focuses on managing other people's emotions. That distinction matters. You were never meant to carry the emotional comfort of everyone around you, but many women are taught that they should. So when you stop doing emotional labor for others, guilt tries to pull you back into the familiar role. It whispers that you are responsible for disappointment. It tells you that harmony matters more than honesty. It suggests that your needs are optional. This is where awareness changes everything. When you recognize guilt as a conditioned response rather than a moral compass, you stop obeying it automatically. You begin to observe it instead of reacting to it. You realize that guilt is information, not instruction. Ask yourself what guilt is really protecting. Often, it is protecting an old pattern of being needed, being liked, being seen as good. But growth requires letting go of versions of yourself that no longer fit. Boundaries do not make you less kind, they make your kindness honest. Guilt also appears because boundaries introduce silence. When you stop explaining, justifying, or softening your needs, there is a pause. And in that pause, your mind wants to rush in and fill the space. Guilt pushes you to over-explain so that others feel comfortable again. Learning to tolerate that silence is a skill. It is also the beginning of emotional freedom. There's a moment after every boundary where you are tempted to undo it, to send another message, to add a smile, to reassure the other person that you are still good. That urge is not intuition, it is conditioning. It is your nervous system trying to restore an old balance. The work in this chapter is not to eliminate guilt instantly. That comes later. The work here is to understand it, to see guilt clearly for what it is, a learned emotional response that no longer gets to run your life. You are allowed to disappoint people. Disappointment is not harm. You are allowed to change. Change is not betrayal. You are allowed to protect your energy. Protection is not selfishness. When guilt shows up, instead of asking what you did wrong, ask what you are unlearning. Ask which old rule you are breaking. Ask which version of yourself is being challenged. That shift alone creates space. Boundaries feel uncomfortable at first because they require you to tolerate emotions you were never taught to hold. The discomfort does not mean you are doing something wrong. It means you are doing something new. And new always feels uneasy before it feels natural. This chapter is the foundation of everything that follows, because once you stop seeing guilt as proof that you are wrong, you stop letting it control your choices. You begin to understand that guilt is not a stop sign. It is a threshold. And on the other side of that threshold is clarity, self-respect, and the beginning of relationships that no longer require you to abandon yourself to be loved. Chapter 2. The Invisible Rules Women Were Taught to Follow. Long before you ever questioned your right to say no, you learned a set of rules that were never written down. No one sat you down and explained them clearly, yet somehow you absorbed them anyway. These rules shaped how you moved through the world, how you related to others, and how you measured your worth. They whispered who you were supposed to be and punished you emotionally whenever you stepped outside the lines. These invisible rules are one of the deepest reasons boundaries feel so difficult for women. One of the first rules is simple but powerful. Be agreeable, be pleasant, do not make things uncomfortable. From an early age, many women learn that approval comes from being easy to be around. You are praised when you cooperate, when you smile, when you adapt. Over time, your nervous system begins to associate acceptance with self-suppression. You learn that keeping the peace often matters more than telling the truth. Another rule follows closely behind it. Do not be too much. Do not ask for too much time, too much space, too much reassurance, or too much understanding. If you need more, you learn to shrink that need until it fits comfortably inside other people's expectations. This rule teaches you to doubt your instincts, to second-guess your feelings, to minimize your own experience so others do not feel burdened. There is also the rule of emotional responsibility. Women are often taught, directly or indirectly, that they are responsible for the emotional atmosphere around them. If someone is upset, it feels like your job to smooth it over. If someone is disappointed, you feel compelled to fix it. This rule trains you to prioritize emotional harmony over personal honesty. Boundaries threaten that harmony, so guilt rushes in to restore the old balance. These rules are reinforced socially, culturally, and relationally. When you assert yourself, you may be labeled difficult, cold, or selfish. When you accommodate, you are praised as kind, caring, and mature. Over time, these reactions condition you to equate self-abandonment with goodness. You begin to believe that being a good woman means being endlessly understanding, endlessly flexible, endlessly available. What makes these rules especially powerful is that they are rarely questioned. They become the background noise of your inner world. You follow them automatically. You apologize before you're even sure you did something wrong. You explain yourself excessively. You soften your words so much that your boundary almost disappears. You learn to manage other people's comfort before you consider your own. These invisible rules also shape how you interpret conflict. Disagreement feels dangerous. Tension feels like failure. Setting a boundary feels like rejection, even when it is not. Your body reacts with anxiety because it has learned that standing your ground risks connection. This is why boundaries feel emotionally expensive, even when they are reasonable. At some point, these rules may have kept you safe. They may have helped you navigate environments where approval mattered for survival, but what once protected you can eventually imprison you. As you grow, the cost of following these rules increases. You feel exhausted, resentful, disconnected from yourself. Yet breaking the rules feels terrifying because you have never been taught what happens on the other side. The truth is that these rules were never laws. They were adaptations. They were strategies your younger self used to belong, and strategies are allowed to change. When you begin to see these rules clearly, something shifts. You realize that guilt is not proof of wrongdoing. It is proof that you are challenging an old script. You are not becoming less kind. You are becoming more honest. You are not abandoning others. You are returning to yourself. Breaking invisible rules doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments. When you pause instead of immediately agreeing, when you say no without offering a detailed explanation, when you let someone feel disappointed without rushing to soothe it. Each moment feels uncomfortable because your nervous system is learning a new pattern. There may be pushback. People who benefited from your overgiving may resist the change. They may accuse you of changing or becoming distant. This does not mean your boundary is wrong. It means the old dynamic is being disrupted. Growth always disrupts familiar patterns. As you continue this work, you will notice a subtle shift in how you relate to yourself. You begin to trust your inner signals. You listen to discomfort instead of overriding it. You start to feel a quiet respect for yourself that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. The invisible rules lose their grip when they are named. Awareness weakens their power. Each time you choose clarity over compliance, you loosen their hold. Each time you honor your needs without apology, you rewrite the script. This chapter is about recognizing that the guilt you feel is not a moral failure. It is the echo of outdated rules that no longer serve the woman you are becoming. You are allowed to evolve beyond them. You are allowed to create new standards based on self-respect rather than self-sacrifice. Boundaries don't make you unkind. They make your kindness sustainable. They allow you to show up fully rather than resentfully. They create relationships rooted in mutual respect instead of silent obligation. The invisible rules promised connection at the cost of self-abandonment. Boundaries offer something deeper, connection without betrayal of self. And once you begin to see the rules for what they are, you realize you were never broken for struggling with them. You were simply following instructions that were never meant to define your entire life. This is where your power begins. Chapter 3. The difference between being kind and self-abandoning. Kindness is one of the most misunderstood traits women carry. It is often praised, expected, and quietly exploited. You are told that being kind means being patient, forgiving, understanding, and flexible. You are taught that kindness keeps relationships together and makes you lovable. But no one explains where kindness ends and self-abandonment begins. And that confusion costs you more than you realize. Being kind is a choice. Self-abandonment is a habit. Kindness comes from fullness. Self-abandonment comes from fear. One is rooted in self-respect. The other is rooted in the belief that your needs are less important than keeping the peace. The two can look identical from the outside, but they feel completely different on the inside. When you are being kind, there's no resentment. You give because you want to, not because you feel pressured. Your body feels open, calm, and steady. When you are self-abandoning, your body feels tight. You feel drained before you even say yes. You agree while quietly hoping the situation will end quickly. You smile while feeling invisible. Self-abandonment often disguises itself as generosity. You tell yourself that you are just being understanding, that it is easier to give in than to deal with conflict, that your needs can wait. But over time, this pattern builds an internal fracture. You start to feel disconnected from yourself. You struggle to identify what you want because you are so practiced at prioritizing what others want first. This is why resentment builds silently. You are not resentful because you are unkind. You are resentful because you keep crossing your own boundaries in the name of being good. Resentment is not a character flaw. It is feedback. It is your inner world signaling that you are giving more than you can afford. Kindness does not require you to betray yourself. True kindness includes you. It honors your limits. It respects your capacity. It does not ask you to disappear so others can be comfortable. Self-abandonment begins when you ignore your internal signals, the tightness in your chest, the hesitation before agreeing, the exhaustion that follows certain interactions. These signals are not inconveniences, they are guidance. When you override them repeatedly, you teach yourself that your inner voice does not matter. This is how women lose trust in themselves, not through one big decision, but through thousands of small moments where they chose harmony over honesty. Over time, you stop checking in with yourself at all. You move automatically. You respond reflexively. You become who others expect rather than who you actually are. The difference between kindness and self-abandonment becomes clearer when you ask a simple question. Am I giving from choice or from fear? Fear of disappointing, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being seen as difficult, fear of losing connection. If fear is driving your yes, that yes will cost you something internally. Kindness does not require justification. Self-abandonment often comes with explanations. You explain why you cannot say no. You soften your words. You apologize for having needs. You try to make your boundary sound smaller than it is so others will accept it. This over-explaining is a sign that you do not feel safe simply existing as you are. It is a sign that you believe your needs must be earned rather than honored. There's also a difference in aftermath. After kindness, you feel grounded. After self-abandonment, you feel depleted. You replay the interaction in your mind. You wonder why you agreed. You feel frustration toward yourself. That frustration is not self-hatred. It is self-awareness trying to break through. Many women fear that if they stop self-abandoning, they will become selfish or cold, but this fear is built on a false equation. Self-respect is not selfishness. Boundaries are not cruelty. Saying no is not rejection, it is clarity. In fact, self-abandonment erodes genuine kindness over time. When you give beyond your capacity, your generosity becomes strained, your patience thins, your care becomes conditional. True kindness cannot survive in an environment of internal neglect. Choosing yourself does not mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop caring at your own expense. It means your care becomes sustainable rather than sacrificial. This chapter is not asking you to harden your heart. It is asking you to soften your relationship with yourself, to listen, to pause, to notice when your body is signaling that something is off. The most powerful shift happens when you allow yourself to feel the discomfort of choosing yourself without immediately correcting it. When you say no and do not rush to explain. When you choose rest without guilt. When you let someone feel disappointed without trying to fix it. These moments retrain your nervous system. They teach you that connection can survive honesty. Not everyone will adjust. Some people benefited from your self-abandonment. Their discomfort does not mean you're wrong. It means the dynamic is changing. Kindness rooted in self-respect attracts healthier relationships. It invites reciprocity. It creates space for mutual care instead of silent imbalance. As you learn to distinguish between kindness and self-abandonment, you begin to reclaim parts of yourself that were lost to accommodation. You rediscover your preferences, your limits, your voice, your truth. And with each choice, your sense of self strengthens. You feel more present in your life, more honest in your relationships, more aligned with who you are becoming. The goal is not to give less. The goal is to give from a place that does not require you to disappear. Because the deepest kindness you can offer the world is a woman who no longer abandons herself to be loved. Chapter 4: Why Setting Boundaries Feels Like Rejection. When you set a boundary, something inside you often tightens. Even if your words are calm and clear, your body reacts as if you have just pushed someone away. Your mind starts scanning for damage. Did I hurt them? Did I sound cold? Will this change how they see me? This reaction can feel confusing because you are not rejecting anyone. You are simply expressing a need. Yet emotionally, it feels like rejection. That feeling has a history. The reason boundaries feel like rejection is not because boundaries are cruel. It is because your nervous system has learned to equate closeness with compliance. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that connection depends on keeping others comfortable, that love is maintained by availability, that acceptance is preserved by flexibility. When you set a boundary, you interrupt that pattern. Your body interprets the interruption as a threat to belonging. This reaction happens faster than logic. It happens before you can remind yourself that your boundary is reasonable. Your nervous system reacts to the possibility of distance, not to the reality of harm. It prepares you for loss, even when no loss has occurred. For many women, boundaries feel like rejection because they were raised to be relational caretakers. You learned to read the room, to sense emotional shifts, to anticipate needs before they were spoken. This skill kept you connected, but it also taught you to associate closeness with constant emotional availability. Saying no breaks that association. When you say no, you are not rejecting the person, you are rejecting a request. You are protecting your time, energy, or values. But your body does not distinguish between these nuances at first. It feels the shift and reacts. There's also the fear of being misunderstood. Boundaries can feel like rejection because you worry that the other person will interpret them as a lack of care. You imagine them thinking you no longer value them. This fear is rooted in the belief that love must always be proven through sacrifice. But love that requires self-erasure is not sustainable. Another layer is the emotional responsibility you've been carrying. If you believe it is your job to manage how others feel, then any discomfort they experience feels like your fault. When you set a boundary and someone feels disappointed, your mind translates that disappointment into rejection. Not rejection of them, but rejection of your role as the emotional stabilizer. This is why guilt and fear often follow boundaries. You are not just setting a limit, you are stepping out of a role that kept you safe. Your nervous system protests because it does not yet trust that connection can survive honesty. Boundaries also bring visibility. When you express a limit, you reveal yourself, your preferences, your capacity, your truth. Visibility can feel risky when you were taught that being easy to be around was safer than being fully known. Rejection feels possible because you are no longer hiding behind accommodation. But here's the truth that changes the meaning of boundaries. A boundary is not a wall. It is a door with a lock. It determines how closeness happens, not whether it happens. It allows connection to be intentional rather than obligatory. Rejection pushes away. Boundaries define space. When someone reacts negatively to your boundary, it does not mean you rejected them, it means the relationship is adjusting to a new shape. Adjustment feels uncomfortable before it feels stable. Healthy relationships can absorb boundaries. They may feel tension at first, but they adapt. Unhealthy dynamics resist boundaries because they relied on your lack of them. This distinction matters. When a boundary creates distance, that distance is revealing, not destructive. It shows you where connection was dependent on self-abandonment. It clarifies which relationships are built on mutual respect and which were built on silent obligation. The emotional discomfort you feel after setting a boundary is not evidence of harm, it is evidence of growth. Your nervous system is recalibrating. It is learning that closeness does not require overgiving. It is discovering that honesty can coexist with connection. This recalibration takes time. You may feel unsettled after setting a boundary, even when the other person responds well. This is because your body is learning a new association. Safety is no longer tied to compliance. Belonging is no longer dependent on sacrifice. There will be moments when the urge to take the boundary back is strong, to soften it, to add reassurance, to explain more. That urge comes from fear, not wisdom. It is your old pattern trying to restore familiarity. The practice here is to stay present with the discomfort without acting on it, to let the boundary exist without immediately repairing the emotional space. This teaches your nervous system that nothing terrible happens when you stand your ground. Over time, the feeling shifts. Boundaries stop feeling like rejection and start feeling like clarity. You feel lighter after setting them, more honest, more aligned. You realize that the relationships that matter most remain intact. Some even deepen. Boundaries also change how you see yourself. You begin to trust your inner signals. You feel less fragmented, less resentful, more whole. That internal alignment creates a sense of safety that doesn't depend on external approval. The truth is that boundaries only feel like rejection when you have been trained to disappear, when your presence has been conditional, when your needs have been secondary. As you unlearn those patterns, the emotional charge around boundaries softens. You start to see that rejection is about exclusion, while boundaries are about inclusion. Inclusion of yourself, inclusion of your limits, inclusion of your humanity. You are not rejecting love when you set a boundary, you are redefining it. And when you allow that redefinition to settle, something powerful happens. You no longer fear being honest. You no longer confuse closeness with compliance. You begin to experience relationships that honor who you are, not just what you provide. This chapter is an invitation to reframe your discomfort, to see it not as proof that you are pushing people away, but as evidence that you are learning how to stay connected without losing yourself. Because the most meaningful connections are not built on endless availability, they are built on mutual respect. And respect begins where boundaries are allowed to exist without being mistaken for rejection. Chapter 5. Learning to sit with discomfort without explaining yourself. One of the hardest parts of setting boundaries is not saying no, it is what comes after. The silence, the pause, the unanswered message, the subtle shift in tone. This is the moment when discomfort rises, and with it comes the urge to explain yourself, to justify your choice, to soften the boundary so no one feels unsettled. For many women, this moment is far more challenging than the boundary itself. Discomfort feels dangerous when you have been taught that harmony equals safety. When you set a boundary and someone reacts with confusion, disappointment, or silence, your nervous system interprets that reaction as a problem that must be fixed. You feel responsible for restoring emotional balance. Explaining yourself feels like relief because it promises resolution, but often it comes at a cost. Over-explaining is not communication, it is self-abandonment in disguise. It is what happens when you do not yet trust that your needs are valid on their own. You offer reasons so your boundary will be accepted rather than honored. You hope that if you explain enough, the other person will not be upset and you will not have to feel guilty. The truth is that discomfort is not an emergency. It is an emotion asking to be felt, not avoided. When you rush to explain yourself, you interrupt an important process. You teach your nervous system that discomfort is intolerable. You reinforce the belief that other people's feelings must be managed immediately. Learning to sit with discomfort is a form of emotional maturity. It is the ability to remain present when things feel uncertain. It is the willingness to allow other people to have their reactions without rushing to control them. This does not make you cold, it makes you grounded. When you set a boundary and do not explain yourself, you may feel exposed, vulnerable, as if you have left something unfinished. That sensation is the withdrawal from an old pattern. For years, you may have relied on explanation to stay safe. Removing it feels unsettling at first, but it creates space for something new. That space is self-trust. When you stop explaining, you give your boundary room to stand on its own. You send a message to yourself that your needs do not require approval. You allow others to adjust rather than immediately rescuing them from discomfort. This adjustment period is where relationships reveal their true nature. Some people will respect your boundary without needing further justification. Others may push back, question, or guilt you. Their response is information. It shows you whether the connection is rooted in mutual respect or silent obligation. Sitting with discomfort also means resisting the urge to rehearse the interaction in your mind. You may replay what you said, wondering if you could have phrased it better. This mental loop is another attempt to regain control. But control is not peace. Presence is. When you notice yourself spiraling, bring your attention back to your body. Feel your breath. Notice where tension lives. Let the sensation exist without labeling it as wrong. This is how you teach your nervous system that discomfort is survivable. You are not doing something wrong by allowing a pause. You are doing something brave. Discomfort often signals growth. It appears when you are stepping outside familiar roles, when you are no longer performing the version of yourself that made others comfortable at your expense. That version may have been praised, but it was not sustainable. Learning to sit with discomfort also helps you separate responsibility from empathy. You can care about someone's feelings without being responsible for fixing them. You can acknowledge discomfort without absorbing it. This distinction protects your emotional energy. There will be moments when not explaining yourself feels almost unbearable, when silence stretches and your mind fills it with imagined outcomes. In those moments, remind yourself that clarity does not require consensus. A boundary is not a debate, it is a statement. You are allowed to be brief, you are allowed to be calm, you are allowed to be done. Over time, as you practice this restraint, something shifts. The discomfort shortens. The urge to explain weakens. You begin to feel a quiet confidence settle in your body. You trust yourself more. You trust your decisions. You trust that the right relationships will survive honesty. This confidence is not loud. It is steady. You begin to notice that when you stop over-explaining, your words carry more weight. People listen differently. They sense that you are grounded, that you mean what you say, that you are not seeking permission. This is not about becoming rigid or closed off. It is about becoming clear, clear about your limits, clear about your capacity, and clear about your values. Clarity reduces resentment. When you explain less, you abandon yourself less. You stop negotiating your needs. You stop diluting your truth. The discomfort you feel now is temporary. The self-respect you build lasts. Each time you allow discomfort without rushing to soothe it, you strengthen your emotional resilience. You learn that you can survive misunderstanding, that you can handle disappointment, that you don't need to be perfectly understood to be worthy of respect. This is a powerful realization. You begin to live less from fear and more from alignment. You stop trying to manage perception and start honoring truth. Your relationships become more honest. Your energy feels more intact. Learning to sit with discomfort is not about toughness. It is about trust. Trust in yourself, trust in your values, trust that the right people will meet you where you are. And even when they don't, you remain whole. This chapter is an invitation to pause, to breathe, to resist the urge to explain away your needs, to let discomfort pass without letting it dictate your behavior. Because the more you allow discomfort without self-abandonment, the more you discover that you are safe being exactly who you are. And that safety becomes the foundation for every boundary you will set from this moment forward. Chapter 6: How to Communicate Boundaries Calmly and Clearly. Setting a boundary is only part of the work. How you communicate it determines whether it feels grounding or destabilizing. Many women know what they need but struggle to express it without anxiety, guilt, or emotional charge. The fear is not about the boundary itself, it is about how it will be received. Calm and clear communication is the bridge between self-respect and connection, and learning this skill changes everything. Calm communication does not mean rehearsed perfection. It means staying connected to yourself while you speak. It means letting your words come from clarity rather than defense. When you speak calmly, you are not trying to convince, you are informing. You are not asking for permission, you are stating your truth. The first shift is internal. Before you speak, you must believe that your boundary is valid. If you are still questioning it, your voice will carry uncertainty. Calmness comes from self-alignment. When you trust your decision, your body relaxes, your breath steadies, your tone softens naturally. Many women overcomplicate boundaries because they believe they need the perfect wording, but clarity does not require complexity. Simple language is powerful. When you speak plainly, you reduce confusion. You allow the boundary to stand on its own. Calm communication avoids emotional overload. You do not need to explain your entire history. You do not need to list every reason. You do not need to justify your needs. A clear boundary respects both you and the other person by keeping the message focused. For example, instead of saying, "I am sorry, but I have been overwhelmed lately and I just cannot handle this right now. Maybe later if things change," you can say, "I am not available for this." The second version is not harsh, it is honest. Calmness is not about softness, it is about steadiness. Your tone matters more than your words. When your voice is slow and grounded, it signals confidence. When you rush, over-explain, or apologize excessively, it signals doubt. People respond to energy before content. Another important element is timing. Boundaries communicated in moments of emotional intensity are harder to receive. When possible, speak from regulation, not reactivity. Take a breath. Pause. Let your nervous system settle before engaging. This allows you to stay present and clear. It is also essential to separate boundaries from emotional caretaking. You can be respectful without cushioning the message. Respect does not require you to minimize yourself. It requires honesty delivered with composure. Many women fear that calm boundaries will sound cold, but calmness often feels safer than emotional intensity. It creates clarity. It reduces defensiveness. It allows the other person to understand without feeling attacked. When you communicate a boundary, you are not responsible for the other person's emotional reaction. You are responsible for your integrity. Calm communication honors that integrity. Sometimes the other person may push back. They may question. They may negotiate. Calm communication means repeating your boundary without escalating. You do not need to argue. You do not need to persuade. You restate your limit and remain grounded. This repetition is not stubbornness, it is consistency. For example, if someone responds with frustration, you can say, I understand this is disappointing, and my boundary remains the same. This acknowledges emotion without surrendering your position. Calm communication also involves nonverbal cues, your posture, your eye contact, your pace. Standing or sitting with openness rather than tension reinforces your message. You are not bracing for conflict, you are offering clarity. As you practice this, you may notice discomfort arise. Calm boundaries can feel unfamiliar because you are no longer cushioning others at your own expense. That discomfort is part of the learning process. It does not mean you are doing something wrong. Over time, calm communication builds trust. People learn that you mean what you say, that your words are consistent, that your boundaries are not emotional reactions, but thoughtful decisions. This consistency reduces conflict, it removes confusion, it allows relationships to adapt rather than collapse. You also begin to trust yourself more. Each time you communicate calmly, you reinforce self-respect. You see that you can speak your truth without losing control, without losing kindness, without losing yourself. Calm communication is a skill, and like any skill, it strengthens with practice. You may stumble, you may feel awkward, you may replay conversations afterward. That is normal. What matters is your willingness to keep choosing clarity. This chapter is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming honest. Honest with yourself first, honest with others second. When you communicate boundaries calmly and clearly, you stop leaking energy. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop waiting for permission to exist fully. Your voice becomes steadier because your inner world is steadier. And that steadiness changes how you move through life. You become less reactive, less anxious, more grounded. You begin to experience a quiet confidence that does not rely on approval, a confidence rooted in knowing that you can speak for yourself and remain intact. This is the power of calm communication. Not loud, not dramatic, not defensive, clear, grounded, unapologetic. And from this place, boundaries stop feeling like confrontation and start feeling like self-respect spoken out loud. Chapter 7: When People Push Back and How to Stay Grounded. The moment you begin setting boundaries, something important happens. The world responds. Not always gently, not always supportively, sometimes with confusion, sometimes with resistance, sometimes with subtle pressure disguised as concern. This chapter is about what to do when that pushback arrives and how to remain grounded in yourself without retreating, hardening, or giving up. Pushback does not mean your boundary is wrong. It means the dynamic is changing. For some people, your flexibility was familiar, your availability was expected, your silence was comfortable. When you introduce a boundary, you introduce uncertainty, and uncertainty often triggers resistance. This resistance can appear in many forms. Someone may question your decision repeatedly, as if persistence might wear you down. Someone may express disappointment in a way that subtly asks you to fix it. Someone may accuse you of changing or becoming distant. Others may withdraw, hoping the silence will pull you back into old patterns. Each of these reactions can feel deeply unsettling if you are not prepared for them. Your nervous system may interpret pushback as danger. You may feel the urge to explain again, to soften the boundary, to compromise yourself just enough to restore peace. This urge is familiar. It is the reflex to return to what once kept you safe. But safety built on self-abandonment is not true safety. It is survival. Staying grounded during pushback begins with remembering why the boundary exists. Boundaries are not punishments. They are not ultimatums. They are expressions of capacity and truth. When you hold that clarity internally, external reactions lose some of their power. It is important to separate discomfort from harm. Someone feeling uncomfortable does not mean you have harmed them. Someone being disappointed does not mean you have done something wrong. Discomfort is a normal response to change. It is not a signal that you should undo your decision. Groundedness comes from staying connected to your body. When pushback arises, notice your breath. Notice where tension lives. Slow yourself down. Grounding is not a mental argument. It is a physical practice. The calmer your body, the clearer your mind. You may notice an impulse to defend yourself, to list reasons, to prove that your boundary is justified. This impulse comes from fear of being misunderstood. But understanding is not a prerequisite for respect. You do not need to be agreed with to be valid. Repeating your boundary calmly is one of the most powerful responses to pushback. Not louder, not harsher, simply consistent. Consistency communicates confidence. It shows that your boundary is not an emotional reaction, but a thoughtful choice. There may be moments when someone attempts to guilt you. They may remind you of everything they have done for you. They may frame your boundary as selfish or ungrateful. This can be painful, especially if you care deeply. But guilt based on obligation is not love. It is control dressed as closeness. Staying grounded means resisting the urge to defend your character. You do not need to prove that you are kind. You do not need to perform goodness. Your actions over time speak louder than any explanation in a moment of tension. Some pushback will be subtle, a sigh, a pause, a change in tone. These small cues can activate old conditioning that tells you to fix the atmosphere. This is where presence matters. You can acknowledge the moment without absorbing it. You can let the silence exist without filling it. Others may test your boundary repeatedly. They may ask again later, hoping you will be more flexible. This does not mean they do not respect you. It means they are adjusting. Your job is not to educate them emotionally. Your job is to remain steady. Groundedness also involves accepting that not everyone will respond well. Some relationships will shift. Some will grow stronger. Others may fade. This does not mean you failed. It means you're living more honestly. When people push back, it can stir grief. Grief for the version of yourself who was easier to access. Grief for connections that depended on you giving more than you could afford. Allow that grief. It does not mean you should go back. It means you're letting go. Staying grounded does not mean becoming rigid. It means remaining flexible without breaking yourself. You can listen, you can empathize, you can care, but you do not have to bend your boundary to do so. There is strength in letting people have their feelings. It shows respect for their autonomy. It also shows respect for your own. You are not responsible for managing the emotional experience of others at the expense of your truth. With time and practice, pushback becomes less destabilizing. Your nervous system learns that you can survive it, that you can remain connected to yourself even when others are uncomfortable, that you do not need to collapse to maintain connection. This is how self-trust is built, not through ease, but through integrity. You may notice that some people respond to your steadiness with respect. They adjust, they listen, they meet you differently. These moments affirm that boundaries do not destroy connection, they refine it. And if some people cannot adapt, that is information. Painful information, but honest. It shows you where relationships were rooted in imbalance rather than mutual respect. Staying grounded during pushback is not about winning. It's about remaining aligned, aligned with your values, aligned with your capacity, aligned with the woman you are becoming. Each time you hold your boundary without collapsing, you strengthen something inside you. You build emotional resilience. You deepen self-respect. You prove to yourself that you can choose clarity even when it's uncomfortable. This chapter is about courage, quiet courage, the courage to stay present, to breathe through tension, to trust yourself when old patterns call you back. Because the truth is simple and powerful. Boundaries only feel fragile when you do not yet trust yourself to hold them. And with each moment of grounded presence, that trust grows. Chapter 8: Releasing the Need to be Understood by Everyone. One of the deepest reasons boundaries feel heavy is not because they are unclear, but because of the quiet hope attached to them. The hope that everyone will understand, that everyone will agree, that everyone will see your intentions and respond with empathy. When that hope goes unmet, discomfort follows. Releasing the need to be understood by everyone is one of the most liberating steps in learning to set boundaries without guilt. The desire to be understood is human. It comes from a longing for connection, validation, and safety. For many women, being understood has been tied to being accepted. If people understand you, they will not reject you. If they understand your reasons, they will not judge you. This belief forms early and becomes deeply rooted. But understanding is not always possible. People interpret your actions through their own needs, fears, and expectations. No amount of explanation can guarantee that someone will see your boundary the way you do. When you tie your peace to their understanding, you give away your power. Boundaries are statements of truth, not arguments to be won. They do not require consensus to be valid. Releasing the need to be understood allows your boundaries to stand without constant reinforcement. This does not mean you stop communicating. It means you stop over-explaining in search of approval. It means you accept that some people will misunderstand you, and that misunderstanding does not make you wrong. Many women exhaust themselves trying to manage perception. They replay conversations, they worry about tone, they adjust their words repeatedly to sound more palatable. This effort is not about clarity, it is about fear. Fear of being seen as selfish, fear of being misjudged, fear of being disliked. Letting go of that fear is not instant. It happens gradually as you practice allowing others to have their interpretations. You learn to sit with the discomfort of not being fully known. You realize that your worth does not depend on being perfectly understood. This realization is powerful. When you no longer chase understanding, your communication simplifies. You speak honestly, you say what you mean. You stop cushioning your truth to manage reactions. Your boundaries become clearer because they are no longer diluted by anxiety. Releasing the need to be understood also changes how you listen. You become less reactive to criticism, less shaken by disagreement. You are able to hear feedback without losing yourself. You discern what is useful and release what is not. This discernment strengthens your sense of self. There is also grief in this process. Grief for the fantasy that everyone who cares about you will automatically understand your needs. Grief for the belief that love always comes with alignment. Allowing this grief makes space for maturity. You learn that love can exist alongside misunderstanding. Some relationships deepen when you release this need. Others fade. Both outcomes teach you something valuable. When you stop explaining, you allow others to meet you where they are. Some will lean in with curiosity and respect. Others will resist or withdraw. Neither response defines you. Your task is not to control how you are perceived. Your task is to remain truthful. Releasing the need to be understood also helps you trust your inner voice. You stop outsourcing your confidence to external validation. You begin to anchor yourself internally. This internal anchoring reduces guilt because you are no longer seeking permission to exist as you are. You realize that understanding is not required for respect. Someone can respect your boundary without fully agreeing with it. Someone can care about you and still struggle with your limits. That struggle is theirs to process. This chapter invites you to loosen your grip on the outcome of conversations, to speak your truth and then let it land where it lands, to allow silence without filling it, to allow disagreement without retreating. This does not make you distant, it makes you grounded. Over time, as you practice this release, you notice that your emotional energy returns. You feel less drained, less anxious, less consumed by what others think. You experience more presence in your body, more ease in your choices. Your boundaries begin to feel lighter because they are no longer carrying the weight of expectation. Releasing the need to be understood also brings you closer to authenticity. You stop performing a version of yourself designed to be palatable. You show up as you are, honest, clear, imperfect, real. Authenticity may not be universally liked, but it is deeply respected by those who are capable of meeting it. This chapter is about reclaiming your right to exist without explanation, to choose clarity over approval, to trust that the right people do not need you to over-justify your needs. When you let go of the need to be understood by everyone, you gain something far more valuable: freedom. Freedom to speak, freedom to choose, freedom to set boundaries without carrying the emotional labor of managing everyone else's perception. And in that freedom, guilt loses its grip, because guilt thrives on the belief that your worth is dependent on how well you are understood. Once you release that belief, you stand on your own ground, steady, clear, enough. And from that ground, every boundary becomes an act of self-respect rather than self-defense. Chapter 9. Boundaries as Self-Trust and Self-Leadership. At some point in this journey, boundaries stop feeling like rules you enforce and start feeling like a relationship you have with yourself. This is where everything changes. You realize that boundaries are not just about other people. They are about whether you trust yourself enough to listen when something inside you says, "This matters." Boundaries are self-trust in action, and self-trust is the foundation of self-leadership. When you ignore your own limits repeatedly, something subtle erodes inside you. You begin to doubt your instincts. You question your feelings. You hesitate before honoring your needs because experience has taught you that you might override them anyway. Over time, this creates inner confusion. You feel disconnected, unsure, and emotionally unstable, not because you are weak, but because the relationship with yourself has been compromised. Every time you set a boundary and hold it, you repair that relationship. You send a message inward that your voice matters, that your discomfort is worth listening to, that your needs are not inconveniences. This message builds trust, and trust changes how you move through the world. Self-leadership begins internally. It is the ability to guide your emotions rather than be governed by them. It is choosing alignment over approval. It is acting from values instead of fear. Boundaries are one of the clearest expressions of this leadership because they require you to stand by yourself even when it is uncomfortable. Many women associate leadership with dominance or authority over others, but self-leadership is quieter. It is the steady presence that does not collapse under pressure. It is the inner clarity that does not disappear when someone disagrees. When you lead yourself well, you no longer need to control others to feel safe. Boundaries teach you how to lead yourself through discomfort. When guilt arises, you do not panic. When tension appears, you do not retreat. You stay present. You listen. You choose consciously. This practice strengthens emotional maturity. As self-trust grows, your boundaries become less reactive. You no longer wait until you are overwhelmed to speak up. You notice signals earlier. You act sooner. You communicate more clearly. This proactivity prevents resentment and burnout. You also begin to recognize that saying yes is meaningful only when no is available. Your agreements become genuine. Your generosity becomes clean. You give because you want to, not because you feel trapped. This authenticity strengthens your relationships. Boundaries also clarify your identity. You learn what matters to you, what drains you, what nourishes you. This clarity allows you to build a life that reflects who you are rather than who you are expected to be. Self-leadership requires accountability, not harshness, but honesty. When you notice yourself crossing your own boundaries, you pause and ask why. Are you avoiding discomfort? Seeking approval?
abandoning yourself to maintain peace. This awareness allows you to adjust without shame. Over time, you develop confidence, not from external praise, but from internal consistency. You trust yourself because you show up for yourself. You follow through on your needs. You respect your limits. This confidence is stable because it does not depend on being liked. As you embody self-leadership, you notice a shift in how others respond to you. Some may resist at first, others may respect you more deeply. Either way, you feel less shaken because your center of gravity is internal. You stop asking, who will approve of this decision, and start asking, does this align with me? That question becomes your compass. Boundaries also teach discernment. You learn when to engage and when to step back, when to explain and when to remain silent, when to offer care and when to protect your energy. Discernment is wisdom born from self-trust. This chapter is about reclaiming authority over your inner world. It is about recognizing that leadership does not require permission. You do not need consensus to honor yourself. You need courage. When you lead yourself well, guilt loses its power. Guilt relies on self-doubt. It thrives when you question your right to choose. As self-trust strengthens, guilt becomes information rather than command. You begin to experience a deeper sense of safety, not because the world becomes predictable, but because you know you can handle yourself within it. You trust your ability to respond thoughtfully. You trust your resilience. Boundaries become less about protection and more about alignment. You are not keeping people out, you are inviting them to meet you honestly. Some will not, but you remain whole regardless. This wholeness is the gift of self-leadership. You stop fragmenting yourself to fit situations. You stop performing roles that drain you. You become consistent across contexts. Living this way requires ongoing practice. There will be moments when old patterns resurface, moments when guilt feels loud, moments when you hesitate. These moments are not failures. They are invitations to recommit. Each boundary you set strengthens the leader within you. Each time you honor your limits, you reinforce your values. Each time you stay grounded, you deepen self-trust. This is not about perfection, it's about integrity. And integrity creates peace. When you trust yourself, you no longer fear being alone with your decisions. You no longer rush to justify. You no longer collapse when misunderstood. You stand steady. Boundaries as self-trust and self-leadership change the way you live. You move through life with clarity. You speak with intention. You choose with confidence. And from this place, guilt no longer defines your boundaries. Your values do.
Chapter 10. Becoming a woman who honors herself without apology. There is a moment that arrives quietly after all the learning, the discomfort, and the practice. It does not announce itself with confidence or certainty. It shows up as a feeling of steadiness, a sense that you no longer need to convince yourself to choose your needs. You simply do. This is the moment you begin honoring yourself without apology, not because you have become fearless, but because you have become rooted. Honoring yourself without apology does not mean you no longer care about others. It means you no longer disappear to keep them comfortable. It means your needs are no longer negotiable by default. You understand that self-respect is not something you earn through overgiving. It is something you practice through alignment. For a long time, you may have believed that being a good woman required you to be endlessly understanding, that love meant flexibility without limits, that strength meant endurance. But endurance without boundaries is not strength, it is self-neglect. True strength is the willingness to stand with yourself even when it would be easier to give in. When you honor yourself, you stop asking for permission to exist fully. You stop softening your truth so it will be easier to swallow. You stop measuring your worth by how little space you take up. Instead, you begin to trust that your presence is not a burden. Your needs are not excessive. Your boundaries are not attacks.
This trust changes how you move through the world. You speak more slowly, you listen more deeply, you choose more intentionally. You no longer rush to fill silence or smooth tension. You allow conversations to unfold without managing every emotion in the room. This calm presence becomes part of who you are. Honoring yourself also means accepting that not everyone will like the version of you who has boundaries. Some people preferred the version of you who said yes more easily, who overextended, who absorbed discomfort quietly. Letting go of their approval can feel like loss, and it is, but it is a loss that makes room for something truer. You begin to experience relationships differently. Some connections deepen because they are no longer built on obligation. Others fall away because they were sustained by imbalance. This sorting is not cruelty, it is clarity. It allows space for relationships that meet you where you are, not where you were willing to disappear. Living without apology does not mean becoming rigid. It means becoming honest. Honest about your capacity, honest about your limits, honest about what you can give without resentment. This honesty protects both you and the people in your life. There will still be moments when guilt whispers, when old habits tug at you, when the urge to explain or soften resurfaces. These moments are not failures, they are reminders of how far you have come. Each time you choose yourself again, you reinforce your new identity. An unapologetic woman is not loud, she is clear. She does not dominate conversations. She does not justify her existence. She does not overpromise. She follows through on what she says because her words are aligned with her truth. This alignment brings peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from integrity. You feel whole because your inner world and outer actions match. There is less internal friction, less self-doubt, less emotional exhaustion. You begin to recognize that boundaries were never about control. They were about care. Care for your time, care for your energy, care for your emotional health. When you honor yourself, you model what healthy self-respect looks like. Others may learn from it, others may resist it. Either way, you remain grounded. Honoring yourself without apology also means redefining kindness. Kindness no longer means compliance. It means truth delivered with respect. It means care that includes you. It means generosity that does not cost you your well-being. This chapter is the closing of one identity and the beginning of another. You are no longer the woman who wonders if she is allowed to set boundaries. You are the woman who knows she is. You no longer ask whether your needs are valid. You listen when they speak. This does not make life perfect. It makes it honest. And honesty is what allows you to build a life that fits. As you move forward, remember that honoring yourself is not a single decision. It is a daily practice, a choice you make in conversations, in commitments, in moments of tension. Each choice strengthens the relationship you have with yourself. You will still be learning, still adjusting, still growing, but you will no longer be abandoning yourself along the way. This is the quiet victory of boundaries, not the absence of guilt, but the presence of self-respect, not the approval of everyone, but the alignment of your inner world. When you honor yourself without apology, you stop shrinking, you stop performing, you stop negotiating your worth. You stand, and in that standing, you become free.